Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our fifth and last Lunch and Learn of the 23-24 school year with Special Education Advocate Virginia Blum, preparing for the Annual Review PPT. I am Christine Lai, Special Education Legal Fund's Executive Director and co-founder, and I'm so pleased to welcome you all to this last in our first Lunch and Learn series. So let's get started. First off, I would like to thank our sponsors, without whom so much of what we do would not be possible. At the platinum level, WealthSpire Advisors. At the gold level, Winston Preparatory School. At the silver level, American School for the Deaf, Chapel Haven Schleifer Center, Eagle Hill School, Fusion Academy, Villa Maria School, and at the bronze level, Shrub Oak International School, the Pinnacle School, and Spire School. Thank you so much to all of our corporate sponsors. We could not do what we do without your support. For those of you who are joining us who are not familiar with Special Education Legal Fund, Special Education Legal Fund is a nonprofit organization founded in 2018, and our mission is to provide resources, knowledge, and support to families in need with children in the special education system. We do this predominantly through two grants programs, the Legal Assistance Program for attorneys and the Advocacy Support Program for advocates. We are currently accepting applications in both of those programs. The Legal Assistance Program, as I said, is for attorneys and provides families with a $6,000 grant to receive support from a qualified special education attorney, while the Advocacy Support Program provides families in need whose student has an IEP or 504 plan with a $1,000 grant for advocacy support from a qualified non-attorney special education advocate from our list. If you'd like to begin the process, or for more information, please visit our website, www.spedlegalfund.org. And the next deadline for applications is March 15th. You will have to log in and complete a pre-screen through the system, which will send you an application via a link in an email. You will then, after you complete the application and provide the appropriate documents, be contacted for an interview, and everyone who applies and completes the application and interview process will be notified as to the status of their application by the end of the month in which they apply, which means if you apply for March, you send in your application by March 15th, you complete your interview by March 22nd, you'll be notified by the end of the month, which is March 31st. And you can click on this or scan this QR code to go directly to our website, or go to spedlegalfund.org and click on Apply for Grant. Tomorrow night, just another short commercial here. We are so pleased to welcome a panel of experts to talk about supporting students with autism in schools. This includes special education advocate Julie Swanson, life skills lady, special education attorney Melissa Gagne from Laviano and Gagne, as well as our educators who are representing schools on the panel, Gina Apicella from Chapel Haven, Schleifer Center, New Haven, and Catherine Crosby from the Pinnacle School. So please join us, register for this webinar tomorrow night at 7, same way you did for the webinar today. And we're super excited to welcome this panel as well as all of you who'd like to join us. And then a continuation of my commercial, our next webinar in March is on anxiety and mental health in school. And this is a really apropos topic at the moment, with anxiety, mental health, school refusal, and other challenges at real highs for our students. We are going to welcome attorney Dana Johnson, Dr. Tammy Moskrip from the Spire School, and Dr. Adrian Smaller from Yale Child Study to talk about anxiety, mental health, depression, and all the ways that schools can support those issues. Finally, I am so pleased to welcome Virginia Blum back to our series. This is the fifth in our Lunch and Learn series, and Virginia has done an amazing job. So I want to just extend the deepest of thanks to her for taking the time to share both her knowledge and her expertise with our community over the past, 6-ish months. So thank you so much, Virginia, for this and all of the work that you do on behalf of not only our families, but on behalf of families in Connecticut with students that have special education needs. So thanks, Virginia. This would not be a webinar without a disclaimer. So the webinar panel is presented for informational purposes only. This webinar is intended as a resource for families who are navigating the special education system in Connecticut or New York, and is not intended to provide legal support, advice, or assistance to any particular individual, nor is it intended to replace the advice and counsel of a qualified special education attorney. Families in need of legal assistance, advice, and support should contact a special education attorney licensed to practice in their state of residence and to discuss the specific needs of their individual student. This webinar should not be construed as an endorsement by Special Education Legal Fund or any of its representatives of any of the participating attorneys, advocates, or other professionals in the panel, nor should it be construed as an endorsement of any school or school representative invited to appear on this panel. Just a side note, if you'd like to ask a question, and we are going to have time for questions at the conclusion of today's Lunch and Learn, please refrain from including your child's name, your child's school district, any identifying information about your child or yourself or the child's school in the chat or in the email that you send to me. I'm going to include my email in the chat so that you can send emails directly to me, and please abide by those restrictions in terms of identifying information. So there you go. All right, let's begin. Virginia, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. And I'm excited to be talking about this important topic, because I think there's a lot that we should be doing as parents and members of the PPT committee to prepare and to run an annual review PPT. One thing I do want to distinguish is, and Christine mentioned this with one of the pre-questions for today, this presentation is going to be around preparing for an annual review PPT. If you have a triennial evaluation as part of the annual review, that is a sort of a more intensive evaluation process as well as an annual review. So my slides are around an annual review. The triennial happens every 3 years. And, maybe we'll add that as a continuation of our series, and then thoughts for next time. But just please know that this is just going to be, we've had, an eligibility meeting, we've put a PPT and IEP in place, and we're coming back a year later to see how we did. So let's go to our first slide. So what is an annual review PPT? This is a meeting. It is required to happen and to review and update your child's IEP. So you can have PPT meetings throughout the school year. They're called review and revise meetings. You can, it's a living document, your IEP, so it can be updated as new information happens, but it is mandated by law that you have an annual review PPT, and that has to occur on or before the date of your last annual review meeting. So it is very important that this be scheduled, and really should be scheduled 15 days before your IEP is sort of up. I do find that that sometimes districts are more under the wire, but it is required to happen, and it must happen annually. The district has a legal responsibility to conduct this annual review meeting for any student that resides within their school district and has an IEP. So if you have a placement and you're not at your districted school, it is still a requirement to have an annual review PPT every year. The first page of your IEP lists on it when they conducted the most recent annual review and the date that the next annual review is due. It's on the front page of a Connecticut IEP, that first block. It also, just as an aside, lists the date of the last triennial and when the next one is due. And you should receive a PPT invitation that includes the purpose of the meeting, and this should state to conduct an annual review. So you should be informed of when this meeting is and the purpose of every PPT meeting, but this one should say annual review on it. Next slide. So what should you do before a PPT? And I say this because I think a lot of us go to these meetings that, oh, I have a meeting, I put it on my calendar and I show up at the school, and I haven't really thought about, what concerns I have, what data I need to review. And, if I'm sitting in a meeting and I have lots of professionals around me, my ability to take information in, ask meaningful questions, and participate, if I haven't read information prior to this meeting, is going to be very limited. So I think there's a lot of steps that need to happen for you to be prepared to be a participant in this meeting. The first thing is you should review your PPT invitation to make sure that it has everybody that you want to talk to at this meeting. So if your child is receiving counseling services, you want to make sure that the person that's delivering those services is listed as required to attend this meeting. PPT teams should have an administrator or must have, I should have written that. They must have an administrator, somebody that is there that can make decisions. Usually it's the vice principal of the school. Sometimes it's the principal. Sometimes it's somebody from downtown or, depends on the meeting, but it has to have an administrator. The school psychologist, the regular ed teacher. So, and if your child is in middle school and has multiple teachers, make sure that you're not getting the cooking teacher. You want somebody that, maybe if you're really concerned about reading, your English teacher should come. Or if you have questions about math, you want to make sure that the math teacher's there. Special ed teacher, and any direct service related providers that are listed on your IEP. So if your child gets speech, you want the speech person. If the child gets OT, you want the OT. If you have a concern that your child should be receiving a service that currently they're not, you can request, hey, I have a question. I really want a PT to attend the meeting, or my child's handwriting is horrible. I need the OT to come. So when you look at the invitation and you see who's coming, if it doesn't include somebody that you want to include, you should send an email and request that person attend the meeting. You want to request information from the team to review in advance of this meeting. So, if it's an annual review, you want to, at a minimum, to look at the final progress report on all the current goals and objectives. Because you want to know if that's the child's report card, how many objectives are mastered and how many are not. So that's, you have to have a finalized progress report. The other thing that I think that is very appropriate to ask for is draft updates to the IEP. So you want the team to send you any changes they're going to be making to your child's IEP in advance of the meeting. Now, that should include updates to present levels, updates to goals and objectives, updates to accommodations. It will not include updates or changes to services. That's something that we would discuss after we set all of those three things. But I certainly don't want to go into a meeting trying to read all the changes that they're going to be making and participate. You want to have time to read that in advance of the meeting. And then if your district does any, reach out to the case manager, to the individual teachers, and get updates. How's my kid doing? More than just grades. Like, how are they doing socially? What does the lunchroom look like? Like, any questions that you might have, get that information so that you can then go in and formulate questions. If you have separate progress monitoring data, if your child has a reading progress monitoring plan, or if they have a behavior intervention plan, you want to see the data around that. So if you're tracking, behavior, give me the data and the graphs on the behavior that's being tracked. So all of the information that would be discussed at this meeting should be sent to you in advance. Technically, Connecticut has changed. It used to be that it should be sent within 5 days in advance. It's now within 3 days. But if you ask for it, they pull it together and you do get it in advance. Next slide. Well, I guess I kind of went through that, but I'll just
summarize
it. I already told you about the final progress report, draft updates we just talked about, standardized testing. So in elementary school, the teachers do a beginning of the year baseline for reading and math. They do a middle of the year in January, and they do something at the end of the year. So if you're going into a meeting now in February, you want to see the beginning year benchmarks and the mid-year benchmarks. You want to see if there's progress or not. And so again, you want to look at that prior to the meeting. Your report card, grades, missing assignments are huge. Why are the grades where they are? And I think you can get some of this data now, in the way the schools are reporting it. But if you can't, then you want that to be sent in advance. And then I talked about the reading progress and the behavior data. And then the fact that it's 3 days prior to the PPT. So next slide. So prior to the PPT, do your homework. So get all that data, and then you need to sit down. I mean, listen, it definitely takes me 2 hours minimum to prepare for a PPT meeting per student. And I'm very familiar with an IEP and where to look. So make sure you block some time to look at this stuff, but you want to review the data. So on the progress report, how many objectives did your child master versus how many are marked with any other code other than a master? And generally, rule of thumb, you want to see your student mastering 75% of the IEP goals and objectives. And I literally start by looking at the progress report and doing a tally sheet where I say like goal 1, and if there's 5 objectives, and I make a column, like how many are mastered and how many are scored in any other way. And then I can kind of come down and subtotal that and say, out of 25 objectives for the totality of the IEP, I can calculate, was it 75% or was it not? How many goals are mastered versus did he master anything? That's data, so that when I'm sitting in a meeting and they say, this student has made so much progress, I can say, yep, I agree with that. Or really, because when I look at the progress report that you gave me on what we said he was going to master, it's 20%. I mean, that's hard facts. And so you're telling me that he's making progress, but I don't really see that. So let's really understand what that means. Then I look at, the draft changes to the IEP. So the first thing is lots of teams send me updates to their goals and objectives and drafts. Very rarely do they send me changes to the present levels. And again, if you've attended some of our prior webinars, present levels are really important because that drives what we should be putting on our goals and objectives. And I've already told you that lots of teams backfill that, which is not great. So if your team doesn't send you changes to the draft, to the present levels, a great question to ask is, I didn't get anything. Am I to assume that we're not changing the present levels? And if they say, no, we will be changing them, well, then I want to see that before you finalize this document. What if I'm not in agreement with that? So kind of put them on notice that they need to be sending you this stuff, and any changes that you're going to finalize on a document, I need to read first. And then review your draft goals. Make sure that any unmastered objectives are included in these skills. So lots of times, the draft or a goal, let's just take a simple one. Like my child is going to learn to tie their shoes in a year. And if that objective wasn't mastered, it should be, and my child still can't tie their shoes, and that's important, then on the new draft goals, are they still working on that skill? So a lot of times I will say, please make a note that no unmastered objectives are going to be eliminated from this IEP. So, or certainly we're not going to, the other thing that I look at quite closely is if the goal last year was that my kid was going to tie their shoes, and this year the goal is my kid is going to learn to make a knot, right? Like the first step of tying their shoes. So they spent all last year trying to teach my kid to tie their shoes. And this year, all they're going to say is my kid's going to be able to make the first step, or my kid's going to be able to make one of the ears. Well, that's not meaningful progress, because now I'm working on 2 years of trying to learn how to tie my shoe. And, at the end of the second year, I'm only going to have 20% of that process done. So I would then in a meeting be saying, I'm not in agreement with that. If you thought you could teach my kid to tie their shoes last year, we need to teach my kid to tie their shoes. This is the second year. It's not, we don't want to regress and go back. Or if you want to scaffold it and you think tying the shoe is, then fine, have an objective that says that he's going to do step 1, step 2, step 3, but on that current IEP, it better end with my kid can tie his shoe. So that's sort of something to think about as you're reviewing the draft goals and objectives. If you have time, so let's assume that they gave it to you and you have the weekend and your meeting's on Wednesday, I do send feedback on what they sent me. So any questions I might have, any changes I might have to prompt level. And I'm very specific, reading, goal 1, objective 1, please define the prompt level, or, you eliminated these 3 skills from reading that I don't see on the IEP, put them back on. So that you're being very collaborative, because they sent you information. We don't want to surprise them. This is a process. And I find that the meeting goes much smoother, because when we get to drafts, I've already read what they're going to propose. I've sent them feedback on what I think needs to change, or what we would like to see. And then you can just say, well, what of the feedback I sent, do you have any questions or any changes? Or, so sometimes there's a compromise. If I say I want that skill to be at independence, and the school says, but he really doesn't focus. So, I don't think it's fair to have him do this with independence, because, he's going to daydream in the middle of it. Then I can say, okay, fine, then let's put a prompt for attention only. So I'm not prompting the skill. I'm not telling them how to hold their hands to tie the shoe, but I'm saying, hey, remember, we're tying our shoe. And that's a different prompt. So you can have that kind of conversation, and you can kind of get to an agreement, but you're not going through every little step. And I find that, that's going to make that meeting be very productive. And you're going to get, bottom line is, your goals are going to be really tighter, because you've had that back and forth.
You also will save time. I hear a lot of parents, comment that they didn't have enough time to, to go through all of the things, that they needed to go through in the IEP. And, I think that, to your point about being able to, to share this in a collaborative way, helps, obviously, improve that, collaborative communication, and also can help, move things along a little bit, in the course of the actual meeting.
It does. It really, it does. And then they appreciate it. They took the time to send you stuff. It's very courtesy for you to send it back. And again, if you write it like, it's not like fix this, it's more like, could you consider, or please address this. So there's a way to be, respectful in your communication, but still moving that needle. Next slide. So this is something I use a lot. I said, prepare a parent concern letter. And I think this is really important, and something that you should do before any annual review. There is a section in the IEP called parent concerns. And I think that, as a parent, the first thing, anybody that's coming to me as an advocate, they say, oh, this is a nightmare, Virginia. I have so much, I told them all these things, but I pick up the document and I read the parent concern section, and it says the parent's in full agreement with the document. And 9 times out of 10, that isn't true. But if you've prepared a letter that, is, or a bullet point list or whatever, that summarizes your concerns with progress, that summarizes, I did the analysis on the final progress report, and noted that, my kid only mastered 18% of the IEP. I don't think that's meaningful. Like, those are hard facts. They handed you that document, you're summarizing it, or you say, God, he made a lot of mastery of skills but every skill had so much prompting that he's really not independent on anything. So there's ways to kind of like take the data and think through, what are my concerns, and what do I want to express? And then, ways to solve that. So I said, make the direct request. So, if you think that your child's IEP has, prompting at 5 prompts or unlimited prompts. I am requesting that, we define the prompt level and that my child is making meaningful progress and can independently do skills that are appropriate. This is something I don't share in advance of the meeting. So it's an opportunity for you to kind of get the data, think about it, write a letter. And then when you're sitting down in that meeting and they say, well, we want to hear from the parent on how the parent thinks it's going, you have a very, educated and consolidated, expression that you can then hand to the team, or you can email after the meeting and say, and please make this part of my child's records. So, but, since it's moving and you're sometimes even, I meet with parents the night before a meeting, to finalize this last piece, I don't send it in advance. It's read during the meeting. It's a way to make sure that your document has everything that you're concerned about. It should be, again, this is a collaborative, trusting process. So, this is not a time to try to vent on everything. I'm not happy with my teacher's placement. That's not really, staffing is not part of an IEP process. So we don't, be careful about what we're talking about. I would limit this to how your child is doing, how you think that year went, and what you think productively can help your child get to the next level.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're at a place where, you don't think there's any productive resolution, then maybe you need to be having an advocate or an attorney come to a meeting. But, if you're working together as a team, then this is a great tool to use to help you. But remember, it becomes part of your child's educational records. So you do want to make sure that you can substantiate all the claims that you make and that you are saying what you intend, because it can be used to
as part of the record.
It's part of the record. Anyway, next slide. So during the meeting, so if I've done my homework and I've got my parent letter, if we've all been in meetings, you sit down, they make introductions. That's part of it. It has to happen. They go through, there's they have to read a statement from the state. They have to make sure that you had received your invitation. They have to make sure that you know what your procedural safeguards and where you can find them are. So there's some procedural stuff that happens at the beginning of every PPT. And then sometimes they say, I want to hear from the regular ed teacher. So this is where, if you have the parent letter done, you can, as the parent, can sort of become more participatory in this meeting by saying, I'd like to share my concerns at the top of this meeting. So, make sure that you're getting that point in there. Then it moves to progress. So if you were looking at your child's IEP and there's a progress note that says mastered, but you don't think that child, if your child has that skill, ask a question. Ask them to show you if it's a writing goal that they say he can, write a paragraph. Where is that paragraph? Can I see a work sample? Because when when that assignment comes home, my kid is stuck, doesn't know how to write a paragraph. So, again, just because they have the mastery, if you're not seeing the skill, take the time to say, I have some questions about that. Or if they say he's mastered that skill, but then you see that in the draft goal that skill is still there, unchanged, that doesn't make sense. You can't master something, but then say you still need to work on it. So again, understand what the drafts and what the progress report is saying, and ask a question if you don't. Then they will review the changes to the present levels, your goals, your accommodations. This does include district and standardized testing accommodations, so you want to make sure you understand it. If you don't, ask them to clarify the language, ask them to define the prompts, ask them, to add objectives for skills that you think are important. So, if your kid is struggling to feed themselves with a fork, and they're not working on that, why not? That's a life skill that your child needs to have. So, just because they've presented goals and objectives in reading and writing, if you think your child is struggling with word problems in math, then why, let's have that conversation. If you think your child needs executive functioning support, let's have that conversation. Let's ask for those to be added, especially if in the evaluations that we did to do that, there shows a need for that. Or, a lot of like anxiety, like, Christine talked that we're having a webinar on that. Like, if you're seeing this year, now it's my child was fine last year, but now he's picking his fingers and we're having all this anxiety and we're coming home and we don't want to go to school. We need to share that. And should we be adding some counseling support? Should we be adding some ways to help that child manage that anxiety, that whatever we're asking from them? And that's part of this process. And then, if your child is 14 or older, we need to start talking about transition planning. And that's a big piece of an IEP when we're moving to older children. And I find that's an area that the district sort of, they're usually the same. They're not as robust. And if you're really trying to get your child to go from, a very nurturing, structured setting to a 4-year college, how are we going to do that in the next 4 or 5 years is a really important process. So you really want to pay attention to transition, and you want to understand what are the steps to get your kid to get to whatever that dream is, or whatever that goal is at the end of high school. Next slide. I did this as a separate slide because I always talk about services, and I get so many people that come to me and say, Virginia, I want daily speech. And so I put this after that because, number one, if you want daily speech, you better have a lot of goals and objectives that are supporting the need, because that's how we're going to develop service time, is how much time do I need to support the goals and objectives that are outlined on this student's IEP. But even beyond that, ask questions. So if they say no changes to the service grid, and the service implementer is not defined, or is defined as anybody and everyone, then that's not a great grid, because if your child is getting reading instruction, but the reading instruction can be delivered by a para, by a reg ed teacher, and by a special ed teacher, then you're really giving the district a lot of latitude in terms of the way they're delivering those services. So the first thing to ask is, okay, so let's just talk about reading. What is the duration and the frequency? How often is my child going to get the reading services? So, is it 1 times 30 minutes a week? Is it, every day for 30 minutes? So like, that's the first sort of question, is what is the team recommending on that? If you think it should be more than what the district is suggesting, then you want to say that. I don't think that my kid, especially if progress was limited, right? So like if I look at the speech goals and we didn't master any speech goals, but I'm now recommending the same level of speech, that doesn't maybe make sense, because you didn't accomplish what you said you were going to accomplish. So why do we think you're going to accomplish it with the same number of speech now? So you can certainly ask that. I'm not in agreement with 1 times 30. I really think it needs to be 3 times 30. And we can have a
normal. Sorry, is it normal for the IEP, or what's the practice for the IEP to have, services listed in the grid? Is it weekly? Is it monthly? I mean, what's the standard?
It depends.
I've seen it both ways. I've seen it a lot of different ways.
So it depends on how so it's interesting. Like if I have some elementary schools that are weekly. I have some elementary schools that are 6-day cycle. There's some middle schools that are 8-day cycles. So like, again, the grid is going to be written on the way that they do their cycles, first of all. So 1 times 30 weekly is different than 1 times 30 in a 6-day cycle, because that means there is going to be a week in that month where your kid is not going to get that service because it's a 6-day cycle. But, I guess I would just look at frequency. I would look at, okay, so if the cycle is a week, or is it 6 days, what is the right amount of frequency? Is it twice? Is it 3 times to get my kid to get the skills that we think he needs? But that's only one section of it. I mean, you also want to know who is the responsible staff for that, and who is the service implementer. So this may not be the same person. So for example, counseling, a lot of times I'll have the school psychologist be listed as the responsible staff, but the service implementer can be a counselor. It can be a social worker. It can be sometimes, for instance, I have a lot of districts that want to do special ed / paraprofessional. I mean, I as an advocate don't like that, because that means that you can implement a reading service with a paraprofessional that has no background or training other than the supervision that they've received by the special education teacher to actually deliver reading services. So I ask all the time, we're not comfortable with para, take it off. It also lists the start and end date. Usually that's the duration of the IEP, but sometimes if I'm in elementary school but going to middle school, there might be a different delivery method, because elementary might be weekly, but the middle school might be, every other day or block schedule. So we might have to adjust the service times, and that's how we'll show that as the start and end date. Instructional site is really important. This tells you how they're doing it. Are they pulling him out of the room? Are they pushing into the room? Are they going to a related service room? Are they going to, a separate setting, like, a self-contained room? Like, all of that is delineated on that grid. And then and how are they delivering it? Are they delivering this as a one-to-one? Are they delivering this in a small group? If they tell me small group, I ask them, what is the group size? Right. Because small group to me means very different than small group to them. And so if I find out that, I've got a reading service that they're delivering with 7 kids in the group, that's not small. Like in elementary school, like there's no way that you can manage, 3 third grader or 7 third graders that are all struggling at different levels to learn to read. So, ask the question, if you want the service to be, if they want to split the service between, they want to have some individual and some small group, then you want to be really specific. So for example, if they're recommending every day, 5 days a week, 30 minutes of writing, but they want it to be some individual and some small group, you want the grid to be specific. I want 2 times 30 a week, one-to-one writing, and then 3 times 30 small group. And then I want to tell you that the small group needs to be no more than 3 students that are similarly matched. Their skills are similarly matched. And all of that needs to be spelled out, because I want to know what I'm getting. I want to know that that's what I'm getting. And if you write one-to-one / small group, your child can really get all small group, and they're fulfilling that grid. So you through that process, if they say services are not the same, but I got lots of questions on that. Like, I want to know how you're doing it. I want to know if it's push-in, that it's the SPED teacher that's doing it and not the para. Or at least tell me the frequent, what's the percentage of that? So be really ask a lot of questions and make that grid be very specific. If you think that the service, if they tell you that they're delivering it in a dyad, why can't they write dyad on your IEP? They can. They don't want to, because they want to have the flexibility to add another student in there should somebody move in. But if that's going to be to the detriment or change the delivery method, then have another meeting. But let's put dyad on here. So I spend a lot of time talking about how we're going to deliver services and what that's going to look like on the grid, and knowing what each of those columns means, and asking for what I want. The last thing that I think, one of the changes that I think is really great about the new IEP and CP SEDS is that they now have a grid for indirect services. So these are services that are not being delivered directly to the student, but are part of how we make the team work. So if you have behavior, and if your child has a BCBA, then the BCBA should be, looking at data, updating charts, and providing some sort of consult on a monthly basis. Or you can do some sort of bank of hours for the duration of the IEP, but that should be on the IEP. And at a minimum, I mean, it sort of depends on the level and severity of the behavior, but 2 hours a month, could be 6 hours a week, but whatever that recommendation is, it should be on the IEP. Same with like if I have a child with a speech impairment, the speech and language pathologist should really be integrating and having meetings with the special ed teacher, with the regular ed teacher, so that they're all a team. I want that delineated under indirect services. If my student is being supported by a para, how does that para get trained? And a lot of times I like the para to attend one time a month of the related service. So the para goes to the OT to see the OT working with that child, and to then learn how to help that child. Maybe it's a functional grasp on a crayon that, I can watch the OT do it, and then I can generalize that when I'm working with that child and pushing into the classroom. So that box is important. And if your child has related services that need to be on there, or experts that help, you should use that to really be specific with how much support your child requires indirectly.
What about parent training? Would that go in indirect services? If you have parent training?
I usually I put parent training. I do put parent training under indirect services for BCBA support.
Mhm.
If it's like parent training for like how to work with my child academically, usually that is included in like the team meeting. So you usually, they say the team meeting, you can have a monthly meeting, you can have a bi-monthly meeting, you can have it every quarter. Sort of depends on how much the parent wants to be involved. But yeah, I would put the team meeting under indirect services, because yes, it's required to happen.
Mhm.
And lots of parents say, well, I asked for a team meeting, but I didn't get one. Well, if it's on your document, then you have to get one.
Mhm.
So, that is something that and sometimes, Christine, sometimes they don't put it under indirect services. They list it under accommodations.
Okay.
I don't actually care where it is, as long as it's
Just
on
as
there.
long as it's in there.
So, but if you are frustrated because you want to meet with your team and you don't feel like they are meeting with you appropriately, then request a team meeting, and you want it on the IEP, because then they have to do it.
Gotcha.
Next slide. Last kind of, as we're doing annual review, the determination for extended school year, ESY, is also part of this. It's part of the annual review. An annual review should have an extended school year conversation. If you're meeting in November and they say, well, we don't have regression data, or we want to meet in the summer or the spring to determine that, sometimes you can be flexible, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you need to be planning your summer, and you need to know what your child may or may not need to be doing.
Mhm.
And also, and I guess, as we think about things, we can have a whole separate webinar on extended school year.
And yes.
But just so you know, regression is only one of the 6 reasons to qualify a student for ESY. And so if you think your child needs more support, or needs something like, if they're doing a Wilson or a continuous reading program, the continuous nature of ongoing of taking 8 weeks off may be inappropriate for that, and we might need ESY for that reason. But this should be part of your annual review conversation, and you should be talking about it. Transportation, if your child is able to take the regular ed bus, or the regular school bus, then that's noted. If your child needs special transportation, that's noted. Seat belts, harnesses, all of that's under transportation. There's also an LRE statement, that's least restrictive environment. They're supposed to fill out a checklist if your child is not, in the reg ed setting. They never do, but, again, read your document. And then if you're supposed to, if your child is due for the triennial in the next year, that should be planned at this annual review meeting. I guess I put transportation twice. just to kind of buckle down, the LRE checklist is required for students if they're removed 60% or more from general ed. And that's why it's important to understand the push in versus pull out, because a push in service is keeping your child in
the LRE.
LRE or in the reg ed setting, and that is outside of the 60%. If your child's not able to learn or able to keep up, it's not appropriate to put them in that.
Sorry.
That's all right. To put them in that setting, just so that they don't have to fill out the LRE checklist. So, just make sure you know what's happening. And then the last thing is placement. That is sort of the last step of where is this IEP going to be implemented? And you can have a very productive conversation and designed a great IEP that may or may not be implemented at the neighborhood school. And so you want to understand where that's going to be recommended. If your district is saying they need to go to a different school other than the neighborhood school, I mean, you definitely want to tour that. You are part of this decision, and you want to make an informed decision. So if the district is recommending a different placement that's in district, I mean, before you would agree to that, you would want to go and look at that placement and talk to the teachers and see the types of students that are there. And you can press pause on that and say, I'm not able to make that, so we're going to keep the placement where it is. And then let's set up the tour. Hopefully, if that's the case, your district would have given you a heads up about that, and you would have already seen it before you had the meeting. But just know that placement is part of an annual review discussion. You can flip the slide now. So I get this question a lot. Should I record PPT meetings? I tell you that I always recommend parents to record meetings. I think any attorney records the meeting. I do not believe that recording a meeting changes the tone of the meeting, but it does keep an accurate record. So, you have to tell the district that you're recording this meeting at the top of the meeting. So you can't keep the recording device in your purse. That's not okay. You'd have to say, I plan to record the meeting. You put your phone out on the table, and use voice memo, but
and then they'll record the meeting, and you both
can record that. So it's interesting, Christine, I have some districts that always record if I'm recording, and some districts that say, would you share the recording? Should we ask for it? And I mean, look, again, it's a recording. I would always share it. Because we have nothing to hide, and we're not doctoring or changing that recording in any way.
Right.
I think that recording the meetings is common practice. It doesn't change the discussion, and I don't think it makes anybody worried about it. The thing that is great about recording the meeting is that if after the meeting, and this has happened where, I've had a service person say, oh, we'll agree to a dyad. And then I got the IEP back and it said small group. And we wrote back and said, we were requesting that the document be amended because the service delivery is incorrect. It should be dyad. And the district said, well, we don't write dyad. But that's not what we agreed to in a meeting. And then we could just say, listen, here's the recording. And clearly on, at minute 12.2, you agreed to dyad, put it in there. And then it's sort of like holding their feet to the fire, because then they kind of have to do it. So it eliminates the, I didn't agree to that, or I didn't say that argument, because we have a document of exactly what was said and what was agreed to. So, I don't, if we're going in and it's, a one-off meeting, we don't record, but and I have some parents that don't like to record, but I do think you should know it's your right to record. And that, most people recommend that you record.
And there's ways to do it that are not combative, that are like, I'm so sorry, I have trouble remembering all the things that are happening during the course of the meeting. Would it be okay if you don't have to say, would it be okay? I'd like to record the meeting, because that way, I won't get, so overwhelmed by all the, or whatever, or
whatever. I mean, honestly,
my spouse or partner can't make it and would like to listen into it afterwards. Is that okay? Whatever. I mean, obviously not, is it okay? It's your right, sorry, but, but trying to make it, a little less combative.
Yep. Next slide. So what happens after the PPT? So again, you've prepared, you've spent all this time, and then after the meeting, everybody goes home and crashes in their bed because they're just exhausted. But there's so many things that are important to make sure that occur after you've had this really important meeting. If you gave them a parent statement and you weren't in person, you need to email that, and please, make sure that it's in the record. The district has to complete the paperwork. Prior written notice and the IEP should be coming to you within 5 days of the meeting. If you want,
is that a Connecticut standard or is it a federal standard?
That's a federal law.
Okay.
If the a lot of times now prior written notice is separate. So prior written notice might come, on day 2, and the document might come on day 5. But you need to look at that. You need to read that. If you made requests at the IEP, at the PPT meeting that are not on prior written notice, you need to get them to send you the right documents. Like, don't just trust that they're going to record or going to do everything accurately. They have thousands of these meetings. So, it may be that they're not trying to do anything slimy. They just are so busy that they don't remember it. So, again, it's on you. Read it. You get this document and you have 5 days to read it. Take those days. Make sure you compare it. Go back to the recording. Did I say it? What was said? I want, I take notes, but you want to make sure that your paperwork reflects what you agreed to. And I can't tell you, how many times it doesn't, even though I know that they don't intend it to be wrong. Right. At one time we had all these drafts. We had a lot of drafts going back and forth. We all agreed. I have it all on email that we agreed, and I got the document, and the goals were not
right
what we agreed to.
Right.
It was a CT SEDS glitch.
Right.
And that happened. But if I hadn't looked at it, it would have been wrong. So this is just, it's not that I think they're trying to make it wrong.
Right.
Sometimes,
you could send a draft that's not the most recent or whatever, a lot of things.
Yeah. I mean, lots of things can happen. So you just want to, it's almost like I put my auditor hat on and you tick and tie it. But you want to look at it and make it. And if it's not accurate, you need to follow up. I got it. It's not complete. You're missing these 3 things that I put on prior written notice. This goal is incorrect. Please change it back, and you need to fix it. You need to amend the document. You need to change the document because it's not right. And that is super important because that is the record. That document is the record. And if it's wrong and you haven't said that it's wrong, then, you have 5 days to review it. They're going to assume that you agree with it.
Yeah.
So, so that's super important. And that last hour of work is one of the most critical in my opinion. So make sure that you follow up and your document is the way you think it should be. And if it's not, and they're refusing to amend it, ask for another meeting. You can always have that. Anyway, I think, was that the last slide? Because I know we have some questions. Oh,
there we go.
Here it is.
I think this
parents can request. So again, you can ask for a meeting anytime. You put the request in writing, and the law says to schedule the meeting within a reasonable time and without unnecessary delay. It is not reasonable to wait 2.5 months for a meeting. So, but you got to document that timeline. And I know we had some questions, Christine.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to go, and I apologize if we don't get to your question in advance, but here we go. What can be done if the school completely changes the IEP and does not provide copies of any changes in advance and refuses to give enough time in the meeting to make the changes that the parent inputs and agrees with?
Okay, so they shouldn't refuse to give you draft updates to the IEP. I have districts that say that, and what your response should be is, I am a meaningful participant in the meeting, and how can I possibly be make meaningful contributions if I haven't read stuff
in the
prior
document,
to?
right?
So that's number one. So I will tell you, I haven't had a meeting. They might give it to me the night before, but I usually get it. So and if I'm asking for it, usually if I ask for it, if I back up and I say, okay, like I've already sent emails, reminders to every parent that I have a meeting next week. It's now Tuesday. Make sure you're on top of getting me this stuff. So usually I get it. What was the second part of that question? Sorry. If they refuse to change it, it's on prior written notice. I
Right.
requested, a goal on I don't know, executive functioning. You're refusing my request. You need to document that on prior written notice. We're in disagreement that this document is accurate, but I can't, that's all I can do. So prior written notice is your friend. Everything goes on prior written notice. You make a direct request. You don't have to be in agreement, but they have to document that you're not in agreement and why they think they don't have to provide that.
Right. Perfect. Next question. If the school does not send any data and has a terrible history of never providing the data that the parent asks for, what can be done?
Prior to the annual review? I mean, you can have an annual review meeting and say this can't possibly be the annual review because I didn't get any information, and you'll need to set another meeting. And I noticed that, you have to do it by this timeline because this is when it is. So like you can play it that way in terms of that. If you're at a meeting, I have they only gave you 45 minutes. That's not enough time. You haven't gotten through all of those pieces of the annual review. So you haven't talked about services. You haven't talked about ESY, whatever. We need a continuation meeting. You didn't 45 minutes was enough. And I have to say, a lot of times in advance, if I get a invite and it says that they're only going to give me 45 minutes, I put it in an email. I don't think 45 minutes is enough time. My request is 90 minutes, or at least an hour. And I also, I'm looking at the clock. So if the school district is spending 30 minutes telling me that my kid's doing so great, I cut them off and say, listen, I appreciate all this, but we've got a lot to do. And I don't, this isn't helping. I want to get to this. So I'm sort of running that piece for them, or I'm saying we can continue to talk about this, but if we do, we're not going to get through this meeting.
Great. What happens if the parent suggests a goal and the school states that more data is needed? Despite maybe the teacher saying that it's needed, or the parent's own experience when the child is, bringing home work from school. What other data? How would you respond to that situation?
So it sort of depends on the data, but look, if they think they need more data, let's talk about what does that look like. So for instance, in reading, I often ask for, a progress plan that includes like a phonemic awareness, the PAST, the GE or the WADE, and the QRI for comprehension. And that might be more data. And so we might say, go do that. And then, but we want to know specifically what data you're collecting, what measure you're using. And it's not a normed referenced, if they're starting to say, well, I need a whole nother evaluation, that's going to get my radar up in terms of, well, if you think you need another evaluation, then your evaluation that you did is not comprehensive and we want an independent. So it sort of depends on the data they want and how they want to collect it as to my response to that. But if the teacher thinks they needs to be a goal around that, I would be leaping on that. I'm hearing that the teacher is supporting of this. I don't understand why we wouldn't put a goal area down, because that is data in and of itself.
Right.
So, again, if we're looking for data and we know the kid, if I come in and I look at the phonemic awareness measure and it was below average, but there's no goal that's addressing that skill, there you go. You have data that supports we're below average. Why aren't you doing that? And that's foundational to reading. And we're asking you to do that. And do some research. You can Google like IEP goals on phonemic awareness, or, and have some suggestions. I very rarely write the goal for them. If they say, yes, we'll add a goal, a lot of times I say, thank you so much for agreeing to that. Obviously, you're going to write it and then put it in the IEP. Can you send me a draft before you finalize the IEP so I can look at it and make sure it's what I think it should be?
Great. What are the 6 reasons that
Gosh, I don't know if I can quote them all. but you can Google it. I know it's the continuous nature. I know it's, what I would tell you is every time I sit in an ESY discussion,
Mhm.
they talk about, it's also like the nature and severity of if I
Of
have a
the disability.
nonverbal
Yep.
kid, right, of the
Mhm.
disability, if it's PT related,
Mhm.
that can be, why. So there's, again, it's on the Connecticut State website, but every time, I sit at a meeting, they say we don't have regression data. And
Mhm.
all my responses is, well, that's only one of the reasons that we couldn't be disqualifying this
Right.
kid. Let's talk about this kid's needs. Like, you have a kid that, is nonverbal, or
Mhm.
you have a kid that, if the PT will, whatever it is. So like
Yeah.
you just, but,
Because the
and
ESY standard is different than, than the school year standard. The ESY standard, is to maintain, not to progress. That's why
right.
regression is such an important,
That's why
aspect
they
of
say
that.
it, but
That's why
like,
they
that's
say it.
again, but
Because they're
right,
like,
just
no, 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 you're
know,
not supposed to make progress during the summer. You're just supposed to not get worse. And that's why they point to it. But that's super helpful. Sorry, for that I always hate when I get asked questions about like, what are the five, whatever, and I can't remember the other five. Um, what do you say or do when a school doesn't read parent concerns or include them in the IEP?
well, I don't have the school read them. So I have my parent draft
Mhm.
them, and the parent then says, so if I'm in the meeting and the administrator says, and I want to hear from the reg ed teacher first, I would immediately jump in and
Mhm.
say, actually,
Mhm.
um,
We have concerns.
we have concerns, and
Right.
I want the
Here's my
parent to,
letter. Right.
here's my letter. And then the parent reads the letter. So
Mhm.
you're reading it out loud, and then you're handing it to the district. So I do it that way.
Mhm.
It's a way to sort of like, and then because I'm handing it to them, they have to include it.
Yeah.
It's written out for them. It's
Mhm.
only when it's not written and the district has to summarize it themselves that I find that
Right.
it doesn't
It
include
doesn't done, it isn't done correctly. Right.
right.
And
So
that's
if
why,
that's why
you
you
want to have
write
the
it.
letter.
Mhm.
Perfect. Um, are there things that you can attach to the IEP document, like, I don't know, work samples or things like that? Is that possible in the new system?
I don't know if you can attach, I mean, I don't know why you would want to attach work samples to an IEP. So I'm not sure why that would be meaningful.
Mhm.
Because the present levels should really
Encompass
delineate
that.
the current functioning.
Mhm.
I think that you can put like, if it's a behavior intervention plan, you can reference the behavior intervention plan, and then that's another doc that can be fluidly
Mhm.
changed without a meeting. A reading progress monitoring plan can be on your, the plan. It can reference the plan, but
Mhm.
the actual data is housed is not even in the IEP, but it's in the reading data.
Great.
So I think you just want to make sure that your document lists all those things and has those things, and then as a reader, oh, I should go over here and look for the behavior plan.
Mhm. Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Virginia. We're just over time
I know.
here.
Sorry.
Which is like, great, because it's such a great topic, and obviously we had a lot to cover. Thank you so much for everyone for joining us. If you registered and had to hop off, there's going to be a recording made available to all registrants, and look for Lunch and Learn, season 2, in next school year in 24-25. Thank you so much, Virginia, and to everyone who joined us today. Have a great afternoon. Be well.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.